The port of New Singapore glittered like a jewel against the void of space, its massive rings rotating in perfect synchronization to maintain artificial gravity. From the medical bay window on level 42, Riker Hayes watched supply ships dock and depart with methodical precision. After 15 years as a combat medic in the Terran Defense Force, he thought he'd seen everything the galaxy had to offer. He was wrong. The first sign something was amiss came during the graveyard shift. A private transport requested emergency medical clearance, claiming a crew member had suffered severe plasma burns. Standard procedure, except for one detail, the biosignatures from their ship didn't match their manifest. Riker's fingers moved across the holographic display, analyzing the readings. These vital signs, they're not human, he muttered to himself. The patterns matched nothing in the standard database, but they reminded him of something he'd seen during the war, Xylaxian readings. The Xylaxians were a peaceful race of telepathic beings from the Outer Rim, known for their extraordinary healing abilities. Their neutrality during the corporate wars had protected them, until it didn't. Now their world was protected by the Meridian Corporation, and Xylaxians were rarely seen in regulated space. When the transport's medical pod was rushed into his bay, Riker's suspicions were confirmed. Inside lay not a burned crew member, but an unconscious Xylaxian, her iridescent skin dulled with illness. Neural suppressors had been crude grafted to her temples, standard equipment for transporting telepathic cargo. "Where did you find her?" Riker demanded, already running a diagnostic scan. The transport's captain, a heavy-set man with cybernetic eyes, smiled thinly. "She's corporate property, Doc. Just patch her up so we can deliver on schedule." Riker's jaw clenched. He'd seen that smile before, on battlefields and in back alleys across the galaxy. It was the smile of someone who saw people as products. "I'll need to keep her under observation for at least 12 hours, he said, maintaining his professional tone. "Port Authority regulations for non-human patients." The captain's smile vanished. "We're on a schedule dash." "Which will have to wait," Riker cut him off, pulling up port regulations on his display. "Unless you want me to call in the health inspector for a full quarantine review?" After the captain and his crew reluctantly departed, Riker began treating the Xylaxian properly. Beyond the neural suppressors, she showed signs of long-term sedation and malnutrition. His hands shook with barely contained rage as he documented each injury, each violation of basic sentient rights. The station's artificial night cycle was ending when she finally regained consciousness. Her eyes, shifting patterns of gold and violet, focused on him with intense clarity despite the suppressors. "I'm Riker Hayes," he said softly, keeping his distance to avoid overwhelming her. "You're in the medical bay of New Singapore Station. Can you understand me?" She nodded slightly, then winced at the movement. When she spoke, her voice was rough from disuse. "I am Naira. They took me from my healing center. There are others." "Save your strength," Riker advised, administering another dose of nutrients through her fore. "Those suppressors are barbaric, but I can't remove them without triggering alarms in their control systems." Naira's expression hardened. "You cannot help me. They will return, and you will face consequences for even showing kindness." Riker checked his security feeds before responding. "During the war, I served with a Xylaxian healer named Chorus. He saved my entire unit when we were trapped behind enemy lines, could have left us to die, but he didn't. He taught me that sometimes the most important battles aren't fought with weapons." He pulled up the station's shipping manifests on his secure terminal, cross-referencing the transport's previous routes. "There's a pattern here. They're running a regular circuit between the Outer Rim and the corporate worlds, always with these mysterious medical emergencies." He looked back at Naira. "I can't stop them alone, but I know people who might help. The question is, are you willing to fight?" Naira was silent for a long moment, her otherworldly eyes studying him. Finally, she spoke, You risk much for a stranger. Someone has to, Riker replied, beginning to formulate a plan. He had contacts from his military days, people who owed him favors, and others who shared his distaste for corporate exploitation. It would be dangerous, he'd be risking his career, possibly his life. But as he looked at Naira, remembered Chorus's sacrifice, he knew he couldn't simply look away. The station's morning cycle began, bringing with it the usual bustle of activity. Soon, the transport's crew would return, expecting to collect their cargo. But Riker Hayes had already set events in motion that would change both their lives forever. In the sterile quiet of his medical bay, a former combat medic and an enslaved healer formed an unlikely alliance that would shake the foundations of corporate power in the Outer Rim. What neither of them knew was that they had just initiated a chain of events that would expose one of the largest trafficking operations in known space, and challenge humanity's complacency in the face of corporate tyranny. The real question wasn't whether they would succeed, but how many others would join their cause once the truth was revealed. The security office on level 38 was deliberately underwhelming, a bland space designed to be forgotten. But Officer Kira Patel had transformed her small corner into a fortress of digital surveillance. When Riker entered, she was surrounded by floating holographic displays, her augmented eyes rapidly processing data streams. "You've got exactly 10 minutes, she said without looking up. "Make them count." "I need a ghost corridor," Riker said, placing a secure data chip on her desk. "And transport credentials that'll hold up to corporate scrutiny." Now Kira did look at him, her augmented eyes whirring as they focused. "That's not a small favor, Hayes. What kind of trouble are you stirring up?" "The kind you've been looking for." He nodded toward one of her displays showing shipping manifests. "You've noticed the pattern too. Private medical transports, mysterious quarantines, missing persons reports from the Outer Rim." Kira's expression darkened. "Corporate trafficking. We've suspected, but could never prove it. They're too careful, and station management is too well paid to look closely." She picked up the data chip. "What changed?" "I have a witness. A Xylaxian healer they were transporting. But we need to move fast, their crew will be back within 6 hours to collect their cargo." Kira's fingers danced through the air, manipulating data streams. "A ghost corridor would get you off this level undetected, but you'll never make it to a ship. The docking rings are locked down tight. Unless," Riker leaned forward, "there was a level 3 quarantine alert in docking bay 7. Standard procedure would be to evacuate all non-essential personnel, seal the area, and allow only medical transport." A slight smile crossed Kira's face. "And if a medical shuttle happened to be prepositioned there for emergency response?" "Exactly." Riker showed her his planned route on his secure pad. "I can move Naira through maintenance access ways to avoid the main corridors. But we'll need that quarantine alert to clear the bay." "Naira?" Kira raised an eyebrow. "The Xylaxian. She has information about other victims, other trafficking routes. This could break the whole operation wide open." Kira was silent for a long moment, her augmented eyes scanning data feeds only she could see. Finally, she spoke, "I lost my sister to corporate exploitation. She took a guaranteed contract in the mining colonies. 2 months later, she disappeared. No investigation, no answers, just a standard compensation package and a non-disclosure agreement." She began typing rapidly on multiple holographic keyboards. "I'm creating your ghost corridor now. When the quarantine alert hits, you'll have exactly 18 minutes before security protocols force an override. The medical shuttle in Bay 7 will have pre-cleared launch codes. Don't miss your window." "Thank you," Riker said quietly. "Don't thank me yet." Kira's voice was grim. "The corporations don't forget, and they don't forgive. Once you do this, there's no going back." Riker thought of Naira in his medical bay, of the neural suppressors cruelly grafted to her temples, of all the others still in transit to unknown destinations. Some things are worth the risk. The next few hours were a blur of careful preparation. Riker gathered essential medical supplies, including equipment to safely remove the neural suppressors once they were safely away. He transmitted coded messages to old contacts on other stations, setting up safe harbors and secure channels. When the transport's crew returned, they found an empty medical bay and a very apologetic doctor explaining that their patient had been moved to quarantine following exposure to a banned substance. By the time they realized something was wrong, Riker and Naira were already moving through the ghost corridor Kira had created. "Your heart rate is elevated," Naira observed as they hurried through the maintenance tunnel. Even with the suppressors, her empathic abilities were remarkable. "Tends to happen when you're committing multiple felonies," Riker replied, checking their position on his secure pad. "How are you holding up?" "The suppressors limit my abilities, but I can still sense nearby mines." "There is fear, confusion." She paused. "The quarantine alert has caused considerable chaos." Right on cue, Riker's comm buzzed with a station-wide alert, "Attention all personnel. Level 3 quarantine protocols are now in effect for Docking Bay 7. Please proceed calmly to designated safe zones." They reached the final access panel just as emergency lighting kicked in. Through the grating, they could see the medical shuttle waiting in the otherwise empty bay, its engines already cycling up for launch. "Okay," Riker said, pulling up the shuttle's schematics. "Once we're aboard, I'll need 5 minutes to complete pre-launch sequences. If anyone tries to override the quarantine before we clear the station's defense grid." "They will not," Naira said with unexpected firmness. "Even with the suppressors, I can suggest that any nearby mines focus their attention elsewhere." Riker grinned despite the tension. "Remind me never to play poker with a telepath." They made it to the shuttle without incident, but as Riker began the launch sequence, his comm crackled with an incoming transmission. "Medical Shuttle Delta 9, this is Station Control. We're showing unauthorized alterations to your flight plan." Riker's heart sank, but before he could respond, Kira's voice cut in, "Station Control, Security Override Charlie 7 Delta. Medical Shuttle Delta 9 is conducting emergency quarantine protocols under my authority. Check your terminals for updated clearance." There was a tense pause, then, confirmed, "Security. Delta 9, you are cleared for immediate departure. Please maintain quarantine protocols at your destination." As they accelerated away from the station, Riker allowed himself to breathe normally again. But their escape was just the beginning. The corporations would be hunting them now, and they had only scratched the surface of the trafficking operation. Naira touched his arm gently. "You are wondering if you made the right choice." "Not exactly," Riker said, plotting a course away from major shipping lanes. "I'm wondering how many others are out there, waiting for someone to make the same choice." The medical shuttle disappeared into the vast darkness of space, carrying with it the seeds of a resistance that would soon challenge the very foundations of corporate power. But for now, they had won a small victory, two people from different worlds, united in their refusal to accept injustice as inevitable. Little did they know that back on the station, Kira was already gathering evidence, preparing for the next phase of a plan that would grow far beyond what any of them had imagined. The safe house on Ceres Station was barely larger than the medical shuttle's cabin, but after 3 weeks of constant movement, it felt like luxury. Riker watched as Naira, finally free of the neural suppressors, used her abilities to ease the pain of another rescued Xylaxian. The soft golden glow emanating from her hands filled the cramped room with warmth. "She will recover," Naira said softly, stepping back from her patient. "The physical wounds heal quickly. The other scars." She left the thought unfinished. Their small victory at New Singapore had opened a floodgate. Through Kira's intelligence network and Riker's old military contacts, they discovered dozens of similar trafficking operations across the sector. The corporations hadn't just been transporting Xylaxian healers, they were harvesting their abilities, using band technology to amplify and extract their healing energies. Message from Kira, Riker said, checking his encrypted comm unit. Another transport's been spotted, heading toward Europa. Same signature as the one you were on. Naira's otherworldly eyes narrowed. How many? At least 3 Xylaxians aboard, maybe more. She's sent the route details. He pulled up the holographic display, showing the transport's projected course. But there's something else. Look at this manifest, it's signed by someone with high-level corporate clearance. Higher than we've seen before. The thread puller, came a voice from the corner. It was Vax, another rescued Xylaxian who'd chosen to join their cause. His once bright skin was marked with scars from the suppressors, but his eyes burned with intensity. That's what the guards called them. Someone at the top, orchestrating everything. Riker leaned forward. Did you ever hear a name? No, but I saw things during the experiments. When they pushed our abilities too far, sometimes there were leaks. Mental impressions. Vax shuddered at the memory. Whoever they are, they understand our powers better than they should. The technology they use to harvest our energy, it's based on ancient Xylaxian designs. The implications hit Riker like a physical blow. You're saying someone from your own people is helping them? It would explain much, Naira said grimly. The neural suppressors, the extraction devices, they're crude adaptations of our healing technology. Only someone with deep knowledge of our ways could have developed them. A soft chime from the comm unit interrupted them. It was a message from an unexpected source, one of Riker's former squad mates, now working security on Europa Station. The text was brief but alarming, "They're on to you. Kira's cover is blown. Get out now." As if on cue, the station's external sensors began picking up multiple approaching vessels. Their energy signatures were masked, but Riker recognized the formation, corporate security forces. How did they find us? Vax demanded, already helping the recovering patient to her feet. They didn't, Riker realized, quickly activating their emergency protocols. They found Kira, and through her. He cursed himself for not being more careful with their communication channels. There is no time for regret, Naira said firmly, gathering their essential supplies. We knew this day would come. Now we must ensure Kira's sacrifice was not in vain. They had practiced this evacuation, but doing it under actual pressure was different. As Riker prepped the medical shuttle for emergency launch, Naira and Vax helped the others through the station's maintenance corridors toward their backup escape route, a supposedly decommissioned mining pod that Riker had modified for just this purpose. The transport heading to Europa, Riker said as they worked, it's not just a target anymore. It's our way in. Whatever this thread puller is planning, that shipment is important to them. You want to spring their trap, Naira realized. They're expecting us to run, to keep playing defense. Instead, we go after the source. He finished the launch sequence and turned to face her. But I won't make that choice for everyone. You've all suffered enough. Naira's expression softened. When you freed me, you said someone had to take a stand. Now there are more of us standing together. She placed her hand on his arm, and Riker felt a wave of calm certainty flow through him. We will find this betrayer of our people, this thread puller, and we will end their corruption. The station's proximity alerts began blaring as the corporate vessels moved into attack position. But by then, the medical shuttle was already launching, broadcasting all the signs of a panicked escape, while the real evacuation proceeded quietly through the mining sector. As they regrouped aboard the mining pod, watching the corporate ships chase their decoy, Riker received one final encrypted message from Kira: "Don't waste this. Show them what justice really means." The mining pod slipped away into the asteroid belt, its occupants no longer just refugees, but warriors in a battle for the soul of two civilizations. The thread puller had made a crucial mistake. In trying to harvest the power of Xylaxian healing, they had instead created something far more dangerous: hope. And hope, as Riker was learning, was the most powerful force in the galaxy. The Europa transport loomed before them, a massive cargo vessel disguised as a civilian freighter. Through the mining pod's viewport, Riker could see the subtle signs that marked it as something more sinister: modified shield generators, hidden weapons ports, and reinforced holding cells designed to contain telepathic prisoners. Their security protocols matched the ones from my transport, Naira confirmed, her fingers dancing across the sensor display. But something is different. The energy readings. They've upgraded their containment systems, Vax said grimly. The suppressors we encountered before were prototypes. These are much stronger. Their plan was risky. The mining pod, registered under a false corporate ID provided by Kira before her capture, would dock with the transport under the pretense of an emergency repair. It had taken weeks of careful preparation, calling in favors from sympathetic dock workers and bribing corporate bureaucrats to create a convincing paper trail. "Contact in 5 minutes," Riker announced. Everyone clear on their roles? Their small team had grown. Besides Naira and Vax, they'd been joined by 3 other rescued Xylaxians and a handful of human allies, former slaves, disillusioned corporate workers, and others who'd seen too much to stay silent. Among them was Talon, a former corporate security officer who'd defected after discovering what his employers were really transporting. "Security rotation changes in 20 minutes, Talon reminded them, checking his modified pulse rifle. "That's our window to reach the containment level." The docking procedure went smoothly, too smoothly. As the airlock cycled and their team prepared to board, Riker felt a familiar tension in his gut, the same instinct that had kept him alive through countless combat missions. "Something's wrong," he muttered. Before anyone could respond, Vax suddenly stiffened, his eyes going wide. "Shields," he shouted. The blast of energy that hit their mining pod wasn't from the transport's weapons, it came from behind them, from a ship that had been hiding in the transport sensor shadow. The pod's modified shields absorbed most of the impact, but the force still sent them spinning. "Corporate interceptor." Talon called out, already moving to the defense stations. "How did they dash?" "Because I told them," came a quiet voice. Everyone turned to see Jana, one of the rescued humans, holding a neural disruptor pointed at Naira. "I'm sorry, but you don't understand what's really at stake." Riker's hand moved toward his sidearm, but Jana's finger tightened on the trigger. "Don't." The thread puller showed me the truth. The Xylaxian's power, it could save millions of lives. The corporations aren't stealing it, they're preserving it, developing it. How many people die every day because we don't have enough healers? And that justifies slavery? Naira's voice was calm, but her eyes blazed. Torture? The destruction of our culture? Sometimes progress requires sacrifice, Jana said, but her hand trembled slightly. The thread puller has a vision dash. The thread puller is a traitor to their own people, Vax spat. They corrupt our healing arts into weapons. Another blast rocked the pod. Through the viewport, they could see the interceptor moving to disable their engines. On the transport, emergency protocols had activated, and armed security teams would be mobilizing. What happened next occurred so fast that later, no one could quite agree on the sequence of events. Jana's neural disruptor wavered for just a moment. Riker moved to disarm her. And Naira. Naira did something that should have been impossible with the remnants of suppressor technology still in her system. A wave of pure mental energy pulsed through the pod. Jana dropped the disruptor, clutching her head. But instead of pain, her face showed confusion, then horror, as Naira shared with her the true memories of what the corporations had done, not just the physical torture, but the systematic destruction of an entire culture's sacred healing traditions. They lied to you, Naira said softly, supporting Jana as she collapsed. As they lie to everyone. The thread puller doesn't want to save lives, they want to weaponize our abilities. Turn healing into harm. The interceptor was closing in for the kill shot when Talon finally got their countermeasures online. A burst of concentrated electromagnetic energy scrambled the corporate ship's targeting systems, buying them precious seconds. The transport's moving away, Riker reported, helping Jana to a seat. They'll be calling for reinforcements. Let them, Naira said, and there was something new in her voice, not just determination, but revelation. Jana wasn't the only one sharing secrets today. When I touched her mind, I saw something. I know who the thread puller is. The name she spoke next changed everything. It wasn't just any corporate executive or corrupted scientist. It was someone whose betrayal went back decades, to the first contact between humans and Xylaxians. Someone who had played a long game, manipulating both species toward this moment. As their damaged pod limped away from the transport, pursued by corporate forces, Riker looked at his crew, humans and Xylaxians, betrayed and betrayer, all now united in their understanding of the true enemy. They had lost this battle, but in doing so, they had gained something far more valuable, the knowledge needed to end this war once and for all. The thread puller's identity was now known. The only question was, could they survive long enough to use that information? The headquarters of Meridian Corporation rose like a spear of black glass from Europa's icy surface. In her private suite near the top, Director Asira Voss, known to a select few as the thread puller, reviewed the latest reports with growing concern. Her true name, from a time when she had been simply another Xylaxian healer, was buried beneath decades of carefully constructed identity. But now, after all these years, her carefully woven web was unraveling. Security breach in Level 42, an AI voice announced calmly. Containment protocols failing in Sectors 7 through 13. Unable to suppress telepathic interference. Asira closed her eyes, feeling the psychic resonance building throughout the facility. She had underestimated them, not just Riker and his band of rebels, but the very nature of Xylaxian abilities. In trying to industrialize their healing powers, to turn empathy into a commodity, she had forgotten the most basic truth of her people: their strength came from connection, not isolation. Several floors below, Riker and his team fought their way through corporate security forces. But this wasn't a battle won with weapons, it was won with truth. Every time Naira and the other Xylaxians encountered a guard or worker, they shared the pure, unfiltered reality of what had been done. Many simply stepped aside. Others joined them. The secondary containment grid is down, Talon reported, his security codes still working despite Jana's earlier betrayal. The imprisoned Xylaxians are free. And very angry, Vax added with grim satisfaction. They had come with a small force but were now an army. Every freed Xylaxian, every enlightened human, added their strength to the growing psychic wave. The very walls seemed to pulse with it. In her suite, Asira felt her mental barriers cracking. She had spent years developing defenses against her own people's abilities, twisting their healing arts into weapons and shields. But she had built her fortress on a foundation of lies, and now truth was seeping through every flaw. When they finally reached her, she stood waiting, dignified and defiant. Her skin, once golden like all Xylaxians, had turned a pale silver from decades of using corrupted healing technologies. "You fools," she said softly. "Everything I did was for our survival. Humanity would have destroyed us eventually, I simply ensured we would be too valuable to discard." "No," Naira stepped forward. "You destroyed what made us valuable, our choice to heal, our willing partnership with humanity. You turned a gift into a resource to be mined. And you turned our people into slaves," Vax added. "Made us torture our own kind with perverted versions of our healing arts. Riker kept his weapon trained on Asira, but it was unnecessary. The combined psychic pressure of dozens of freed Xylaxians had already rendered her powers useless. In the end, it was Janna who moved first, stepping forward to place the neural suppressor, the very technology Asira had helped develop, around her neck. "The evidence is already transmitted," Riker said. "Every station, every colony world, will know what happened here. The corporations can't hide this anymore." Asira laughed, a hollow sound. "You think this ends with me? The corporations will never give up such a profitable venture. They'll just find new ways, new puppets dash." "No," Naira interrupted. "Because we're not just exposing the crimes. We're sharing the gift, the true gift of healing, freely given." She touched Asira's face gently. "Even you have forgotten what that feels like." The psychic wave that had begun in the lower levels reached its peak. Through their combined abilities, the Xylaxians broadcast not just information, but experience, the joy of healing, the power of willing cooperation between species, the strength that comes from choice rather than coercion. It reached across Europa Station, across the solar system, touching minds and hearts with the truth. In the aftermath, as corporate executives were arrested and enslaved Xylaxians were freed across the sector, something unexpected emerged from the ruins of Asira's scheme. The Healing Accord, a new partnership between humans and Xylaxians, based not on exploitation but on mutual respect and voluntary exchange. Riker watched from the observation deck as the first legitimate healing center opened on Europa Station. Naira stood beside him, her skin glowing with healthy golden light as she trained human doctors in the basics of empathic medicine. "You know," he said, "when I first helped you escape, I thought I was just saving one person." Naira smiled. "Instead, you helped save 2 civilizations from their worst impulses." She touched his arm gently. "But the work isn't finished. There are other species suffering, other injustices to fight." "True," Riker agreed. "But now they know something important: resistance isn't futile. Change is possible. And sometimes, the most revolutionary act is simply showing kindness to a stranger." Above them, Europa's ice fields reflected the distant sun, glittering like hope made visible. Somewhere out there, more battles waited. But they would face them together, humans and Xylaxians, armed with the most powerful force in the universe, the choice to heal rather than harm. The thread puller's web had been broken, but something stronger had been woven in its place, a network of trust, of mutual understanding, of freely chosen cooperation. And that, unlike any corporate empire, was something that could endure.